Andrew Brooks had 11 minutes to reach the last interview that could save his life, and he never made it. In the lobby of Harper Global, a receptionist named Bryce Feldman was laughing at an old woman in a worn coat, ordering security to drag her out because she did not look like she belonged. Andrew stopped, defended her, and lost the job. 4 minutes later, a line of black SUVs took the curb, and every executive in the building bowed their heads to that same old woman. Who was she? The bus dropped Andrew Brooks 4 blocks from the tower because the closer stop cost 60 cents more, and 60 cents was still a number that mattered to him. He walked with his resume flat inside a plastic folder to keep the rain off it, and he counted minutes the way other men counted money. He came through the revolving door at 8:49 with 11 of them left. The interview was at 9 o'clock, and it was the last name on a list that had run out of names. 2 years earlier, he had a salary, a mortgage, and a wife who signed her name next to his on a loan she later swore she had never understood. The business went down in a single quarter. The marriage went down slightly slower. What was left of Andrew Brooks afterward was a man of 35 who took shifts wherever shifts existed, unloading trucks, painting empty units, covering for people who had better options and knew it. He had stopped explaining himself to anyone. Explanations sounded like excuses, and excuses were the one thing poor men were allowed to hand out for free. The only thing he had refused to trade away was something his father used to say: without ever calling it a rule, what a man is worth has nothing to do with what is in his pockets. It was not a comforting thought at 7 in the morning. It was just the last thing he still owned outright. The lobby of Harper Global was 60 feet of white stone and glass, engineered to make a person feel either invited or removed, with nothing in between. Andrew stepped out of the rain with his shoulders still wet, and the first thing he heard was not the elevators or the phones. It was laughing. The old woman stood near the security desk in a coat that had been good once, maybe 20 years ago, and shoes that had been repaired instead of replaced. She carried nothing. No bag, no phone, no folder, no reason to be there that anyone could see at a glance. From what Andrew could gather in 3 seconds of standing still, she had asked for a glass of water. The man behind the reception counter was named Bryce Feldman, and his badge announced it in raised silver letters he clearly enjoyed wearing. He leaned across the marble like someone delivering a punchline he had already tested on a smaller crowd. "Ma'am, this is a private building," Bryce said. "Water is for guests. You are not a guest. You're a situation." 2 men in suits glanced over and kept walking. A woman with a coffee cup slowed down just enough to watch, and then decided against it. That was the part Andrew noticed first, and it stayed with him longer than anything else. Not the cruelty, which was ordinary and cheap and available everywhere. The traffic. The way an entire lobby of people moved around a thing without ever touching it. Bryce lifted 2 fingers toward the security desk without looking. "Dale, handle this." Dale Foster came out from behind his monitors with the unhurried confidence of a man who had never once been wrong inside these walls. He put his palm on the old woman's elbow. Not hard, not violent, but not asking either, which in some ways was worse. "Let's go, ma'am," Dale said. "Out the side door. We don't need this in the lobby at 9 o'clock. The old woman did not pull away and did not raise her voice. She looked down at the hand on her sleeve the way a person looks at weather they cannot change. "I only wanted water," she said. That got Bryce laughing again louder now because he had an audience. "Sure. Water today, the elevator next week, the stairwell after that. I've seen how it goes." Andrew had 8 minutes. He knew precisely what 8 minutes was worth. He knew the elevator ride was 90 seconds, and he knew the 11th floor had someone whose entire job that morning was to write down the time he arrived, and he knew there was no second list, no other appointment, no next month. He also knew that if he walked past this, he would sit down in a clean room in 4 minutes and answer questions about character while already knowing the answer. He crossed the floor. He did not raise his voice because raised voices were exactly what security guards were trained to respond to. "Take your hand off her," Andrew said. Dale Foster looked at him, then at the suit, which was 5 years old, and pressed so carefully that the age showed more instead of less. Whatever Dale saw there, he priced it immediately, and his hand did not move. Andrew turned instead to the cafe counter tucked into the corner of the lobby and asked for a bottle of water. It cost $4. He had $11 and some change in his wallet, and that number was going to matter to him by Thursday, and he handed the money over anyway, without letting himself think about Thursday. Then he walked back across the marble, put the bottle into the old woman's hand, and closed her fingers around it. "There," Andrew said to Bryce Feldman. "She's a paying customer now. Is she a guest?" Bryce's smile changed shape. It stopped being aimed at the old woman and started being aimed at him. "You don't work here," Bryce said. Andrew set his folder down on the counter, and it was the calmest thing anyone in that lobby did all morning. "I don't need to work here," he said. "You're going to apologize to her." The lobby went quiet in the way lobbies do not, silent, just slower, every conversation dropping half a step. Bryce Feldman now had a very specific problem, which was that he was being asked to become a smaller man in front of a dozen witnesses, and he did what men like him always do when cornered by their own audience. He got louder. He said something about the smell of the coat. He suggested Andrew check his own shoes before lecturing anyone about who belonged in that building. Dale Foster stepped between them with his radio already lifted to his mouth. "Sir, you're leaving the building. Now, walk out on your own, or I walk you out." He had said the line so many times that it had gone smooth like a stone in a river, and Andrew understood that the sentence had never once been about him personally. It was just what the lobby did to people it had already sorted. Andrew did not move. "I'll leave when she gets an apology," he said, and then he looked at the clock hanging above the elevator bank, and the clock said 8:56, and he watched himself lose the thing he had spent 2 years trying to get back. It did not feel dramatic. It felt like a door closing quietly in another room. Bryce picked up the desk phone and made a call he very much wanted Andrew to hear. Yes, there was a disturbance in the lobby. Yes, a man was claiming a 9 o'clock appointment. No, he did not seem stable, and no security had not been able to calm him down. He read Andrew's name off the visitor list slowly, twice enjoying both passes, and then he wrote something in the margin next to it with a pen he did not put back. At 9:04, the elevator opened and an assistant from the 11th floor came out. She took in the scene, the guard, the counter, the old woman holding a bottle of water, like it was evidence, and she did not need anyone to explain it to her, because Bryce had already explained it. "Mr. Brooks, the panel has moved on to the next candidate," she said, "and Harper Global doesn't continue with applicants involved in lobby incidents. I'm sorry." She meant it. In the way people mean things, they are not going to act on. Andrew took it, standing up. He picked his folder off the counter, and the rain had gotten to one corner of it after all, and he looked at the assistant and said, "Thank you." That was the strangest part of the whole morning, and later when a great many people were arguing about who Andrew Brooks really was, that was the detail nobody could explain. The old woman spoke for the first time since he had reached her. "You lost it," she said. Andrew turned the folder over in his hands. "Probably," he said. She studied him with an attention that did not match the coat or the shoes or anything else about her. Why? Andrew thought about it honestly, which took a second, because the honest answer was not flattering to anyone in the room. "Because nobody else was going to," he said. He asked her name on the way out, mostly to give the morning one clean edge. "Evelyn," she said, and offered nothing after it. No last name. No explanation. And he did not push. "Drink the water, Evelyn," Andrew said. Then he went back through the revolving door into the rain at 9:09 with $4 gone, 11 minutes wasted, and no appointment left anywhere in the city. 4 minutes later, the black SUVs came. There were 6 of them, and they did not park so much as take the curb front, to back doors opening in a sequence that had clearly been practiced. The lobby noticed before it understood. Phones went down. Dale Foster's radio started talking, and he stopped listening to it. Somewhere above them, the express elevator was already moving, and Bryce Feldman looked up at the floor indicator with the expression of a man who has just heard his own name in a room he cannot see into. Marcus Feldman came out of that elevator first executive vice president 30 years inside the company, a man who had never in his life hurried in public, and was not hurrying now, only moving with a stiffness that read as fear to anyone who knew how to look. Behind him came Harold Pierce, chairman of the board, and then 8 more of them, and every single one of those people crossed the white stone floor and stopped in front of the old woman in the repaired shoes and lowered their heads. Bryce Feldman's face did something Andrew never got to see. The joke was still sitting in his mouth. The pen was still on the counter where he had left it. The water bottle was still in the old woman's hand, $4 of it, and a dozen people who ran a company worth more than most states were standing in a half-circle around her, waiting to be spoken to, and none of them spoke first. Claire Harper came through the doors last. She ran Harper Global the way a surgeon runs an operating room, which meant she was never in a hurry, and never late, and never in a place she had not chosen to be, and she had chosen to be here the moment her security detail told her where her mother was. She crossed the lobby without looking at a single employee in it. "Mother," she said. Evelyn Harper handed the bottle to her daughter, as if that were the point of the entire morning. "This cost $4, she said. Claire held it and did not understand yet, and it would be some hours before she did. For nearly 10 years, Evelyn had been arriving at places as nobody. It was not a game, and she had never enjoyed it. She had simply learned late in life that a company only tells the truth to someone who cannot cost it anything, and that the lobby is where the truth is kept. She wore the coat because it was warm. She asked for water because asking for something small is the fastest question ever invented. "Your building told me exactly what it thinks of people who have nothing," Evelyn said. She said it quietly, and it carried anyway, because a dozen executives had stopped breathing. Then one man told me what he thinks. He paid for that water with money he needed. He missed a 9 o'clock appointment on the 11th floor standing next to me while your staff called him unstable. She looked at her daughter without any heat at all. "I want to know which of those 2 people your company hires, Claire." Claire Harper turned to the security desk. She did not raise her voice either. It ran in the family, and that made it considerably worse. "I want the lobby footage from 8:40 to 9:10, all 4 cameras. Sent to me directly, not to legal, not to anyone on this floor within the hour." Dale Foster said, "Yes, ma'am." Bryce Feldman said nothing at all, and his silence was the first intelligent decision he had made that day. The visitor log was on the counter where it had always been. Claire turned it around and read it herself. 9 o'clock, 11th floor, Andrew Brooks. And beside the name in fresh ink, in Bryce Feldman's careful hand removed, "Disturbance. Do not rebook." "I'll fix it," Claire said. "I'll have someone find him today and offer him a position by tomorrow. Whatever the 11th floor was interviewing for, he can have it, and we'll be finished with this." She said it the way she said most things, as a decision already implemented, and she was genuinely surprised when her mother put a hand flat on the log to close it. "No," Evelyn said. "You'll buy him and call it justice, and in 3 weeks you'll have forgotten why. Find out who he is first. Quietly. Not through this floor, not through anyone standing in this lobby right now." She let that sit exactly long enough for every person in the half-circle to feel it land on them individually. "Then meet him yourself, Claire. Not an assistant. You." Claire Harper had 2 board calls and a foreign regulator waiting on her that morning, and she agreed anyway because she had learned decades ago which arguments with her mother were worth the 90 seconds. She did not agree happily. She agreed the way an executive accepts an obligation as a task to be closed a favor owed one line on a list of 40. She did not yet understand that she had just been handed the only real decision of her career. Behind her, Marcus Feldman was doing arithmetic. He had heard the name Andrew Brooks. He knew the handwriting in the log because Bryce Feldman was his brother's son and had been put in that lobby as a favor Marcus had never bothered to hide, and everyone in the building could read a surname off a silver badge. It had never mattered. A name in a lobby was not a conspiracy. It was Tuesday. What Marcus understood faster than anyone else standing on that stone floor was that it had just started mattering, and that a man named Andrew Brooks was now going to walk back into this building with 4 cameras pointed at everything the Feldman family had ever done in it. It took Evelyn Harper 5 days to learn who Andrew Brooks was, and she did not use a single person inside the building to do it. She used a retired attorney who had handled her late husband's estate and asked for nothing but lunch. What came back was thin and clean, and in its own way devastating a business that had failed in 1/4 a signature on a loan, a divorce, a bankruptcy, and then 2 years of shift work with no gaps in it. He had never missed a payment on debt that was still legally his. He had never once filed a complaint against anyone. Claire read the file at 11 at night in an office 41 floors above the lobby where her mother had been laughed at. She had expected to find a reason to feel less guilty, a lawsuit, a history of scenes, some pattern that would let her write the whole morning off as a man looking for leverage. There was nothing. That was the part that stayed with her. The man had no angle, which meant the $4 had cost him exactly $4, and nothing had come back. She called him herself from her own number on a Friday. Andrew was on a ladder in an empty 2-bedroom unit with a roller in his hand and paint drying on his forearms, and when the woman on the phone said she was Claire Harper, he assumed it was a collections agency using a new script. It took her 3 sentences to convince him. It took her 1 more to make the offer, because Claire Harper had never in her life buried the point. "Come to the tower Monday," she said. "There's a position on the 11th floor, and it's yours. Consider it a correction of what happened." She could hear him climb down the ladder. Then he said no, and Claire discovered that she did not have a prepared response to that word. "You're turning down a job," she said. Andrew set the roller across the tray before he answered, because it was the kind of thing that needed both hands free. "I'm turning down a payment," he said. "You're not hiring me. You're settling something. If I walk into that building on Monday, every person in it will know I got there by standing next to your mother, and they'll be right." He said it without heat, which made it impossible to argue with. "I've been broke for 2 years, Miss Harper. I haven't been for sale for any of them." Claire hung up and sat with the phone in her hand for longer than she wanted to admit. She had spent 12 years as chief executive, being told yes by extremely intelligent people, and it had made her fluent in one language only. The word no, delivered by a man painting an apartment for $18 an hour, was the first genuinely new information she had received in a very long time. A letter reached Andrew that November. It was written by hand, 3 lines, and it said only that the water had been the best thing that had happened to Evelyn Harper in a decade that she was not going to offer him anything, and that if he ever needed a person who wanted nothing from him, her address was at the top. Andrew kept it in the plastic folder with the resume, which was the only filing system he had. Evelyn told her daughter the same week that she was finished with the subject. "If I keep pushing, you'll only ever be executing my instruction," she said. "Then it isn't your judgment, it's mine, and one day I won't be here to lend it to you." She left in January for 4 months abroad, a trip that had been booked before the lobby, and she did not call. And nobody in the tower would ever have volunteered bad news to the founder's widow. That is how a company protects itself. It just looks like manners. So Claire did the only thing left, which was to make him earn it. Harper Global was 90 days from losing a logistics contract in the Midwest that 3 consultants had already failed to save a distribution network the company had bought in a hurry, and never understood bleeding money through 100 small holes nobody had time to map. Claire sent Andrew the file with no title, no salary, and no promise. 90-day contract. Fix it or don't. He read all 600 pages in 2 nights. He had run a small business into the ground once, and had spent the years since learning in the least academic way possible exactly where money goes when nobody is watching it, and the Midwest network was not a mystery to him. It was a warehouse with a bad floor plan and a routing schedule written by people who had never stood on a loading dock at 4 in the morning. He came back with 11 pages. 9 of them were things any of the consultants could have found. 2 of them were not. Marcus Feldman read those 2 pages in a conference room on the 40th floor and understood immediately that Andrew Brooks was going to be a problem for the rest of his life. Not because the man was brilliant. The tower was full of brilliant. Because he looked at things nobody had bothered to look at, and Marcus Feldman had built 30 years of career in precisely the places nobody bothered to look. The resistance started small and stayed deniable, which is how competent resistance always starts. Andrew's badge did not work on a Tuesday. His contract went to legal for review and sat there 9 days. A meeting invitation went out to the whole project team and arrived in his inbox 40 minutes after the meeting ended. Down in the lobby, Bryce Feldman still had his silver name badge, still had his job, and made a small ceremony every morning of asking Andrew for identification he had already scanned the day before. Dale Foster took a different route. He mentioned to 2 people in the security office that the contractor on 11 was the one from the lobby incident, the unstable one, the one who had to be escorted out. It was not a lie in any way that could be proven. It was just the first sentence of a story released early and left to grow on its own in a building of 4,000 people. Andrew did not fight any of it. He arrived at 6:40 in the morning to beat the badge problem. He got the meeting notes from a scheduler who liked him. He answered Bryce's identification request every single day by handing over the license without a word, and inside 2 weeks it was Bryce who stopped asking, because cruelty needs a reaction the way fire needs air. What Andrew did instead was work. In 6 weeks, the Midwest network stopped bleeding. In 9, it turned. He renegotiated 2 carrier agreements by pointing out politely and with numbers that Harper Global had been paying for empty trucks for 3 years. He closed a warehouse everyone had been afraid to close and moved its volume to a facility 80 miles away that had been running at half capacity since the company bought it. $40 million in annualized cost gone, found by a man who had not been allowed into the building through the front elevator. Claire watched it happen from 41 floors up. She had told herself it was a favor 1 line on a list, and somewhere around week 7, she stopped being able to sell that to herself. She had started reading his memos first thing in the morning. He wrote the way he had spoken on the phone, with paint on his arms, short, unhedged with the bad news at the top, instead of buried on page 9 where everyone else in her company put it. She began asking for him directly. He would come up to 41 and stand, instead of sit and tell her what was actually wrong and leave, without ever once mentioning her mother, the lobby, the water, or the interview he had lost. He never used it. Not 1 time. Claire had spent her entire adult life around people who could not resist reminding her what she owed them, and here was a man holding the only real claim anyone had on her and declining day after day to cash it. In December, she put him on the Red Line acquisition, and that was the shot no one in the tower forgave. Red Line was $2.4 billion. It was the biggest thing Harper Global had touched in a decade. And Claire Harper handed a piece of it to a contractor who had been thrown out of the lobby in October. The board meeting that followed was the worst one Claire had sat through as chief executive. Harold Pierce, who had chaired that table for 19 years and had never entirely stopped grading her, put both hands flat on it and asked whether Harper Global, now promoted, based on performance or based on sentiment. 2 shareholders sent letters. One of them used the word erratic, and everybody in the room knew that word had come out of the tower, not into it. Marcus Feldman said almost nothing in that meeting, which was the smartest thing he did all year. He simply mentioned near the end that the man had no verifiable corporate references and that Harper Global's insurers might want to look at that. Then he let the silence do the work. Harold Pierce wrote something down. It was as Marcus knew the only sentence in the entire meeting that would survive it. Claire converted the 90-day contract into an open engagement in January over Harold's written objection, and that same month, Andrew did the thing that would eventually save him without any idea that he was doing it. Buried in Redline's footnotes was a long-haul freight agreement the seller had been carrying at book value for 6 years. It was worth considerably more than book because the routes underneath it had been repriced twice since the ink dried, and nobody at Redline had bothered to say so. Andrew found it. He rebuilt the model around it, and it moved Harper Global's walkaway price up by $19 million. He filed the revision on the 29th of January, and from that date forward, every live version of the file carried the new number. The old number survived in exactly one place, the archived executive committee packet which sat behind a permission Andrew had never held for 1 hour of his life. On a Tuesday night in February, that archive was opened, and the valuation walked out of Harper Global. Nobody knew for 6 weeks. The rival bid landed in March. Warren Slade held a little under 3% of Harper Global and had wanted Redline for himself since the fall, and his offer came in $11 million under Harper Global's walkaway price. Andrew was in the room when the number was read out. It was a good bid. It was in fact an unusually confident bid, and it lost, and Claire's people spent 40 minutes congratulating themselves on holding the line. The smear came a week later, and it did not come from inside. When a shareholder letter mentions a contractor with no corporate references, people like Warren Slade do what such people do. They found the bankruptcy. They found the loan with a signature on it. Then they wrote the story sideways, which is the only way that story works. A failed businessman who lost everything. A man who had been broke for 2 years. Now standing inside the room where $2.4 billion was being decided. Nothing in it was false. Every fact in it was a matter of public record, and that was the genius of it. It ran in a business newsletter that 10,000 of the right people read, and by noon, it was in every inbox in the tower, and by 2 o'clock, Andrew Brooks was no longer the man who fixed the Midwest. He was the bankrupt. It took 12 paragraphs to undo 5 months of work, and Andrew read it, standing at his desk, and did not sit down afterward, because sitting down would have been an admission. Claire went through the roof. She wanted a statement, a lawsuit, a response by the end of the day, and it was Andrew who talked her out of all 3 in a conversation that lasted 90 seconds. "Everything in it is true," he told her. "If you defend me, you make it a story about whether the chief executive is protecting somebody. Then it stops being about the facts and starts being about you." She hated the logic. She could not find a hole in it. The evidence came 3 days later, and it was good. That was what nobody afterward wanted to admit, that it was good work. The export log showed a credentialed session on the 11th floor at 9:17 on that Tuesday night in February, pulling the Redline valuation out of Harper Global and sending it somewhere it should never have gone. The credential was Andrew's badge. 2 internal emails produced from a backup nobody could easily audit showed a contractor discussing terms with an outside party in language just careless enough to sound real. Andrew had been in the building that night. That was the thing that took the ground out from under him. He had been on 11 until almost 10 because he was always in the building, because he had been the first one in and the last one out since November, and the same discipline that had made him valuable now put his badge exactly where somebody needed it to be. A man who works 14-hour days leaves a record of himself in every room, and someone had simply walked into that record and helped themselves. Marcus Feldman brought it to Harold Pierce personally with a lawyer present, and his voice full of regret. He said he had been wrong to raise concerns about references and right to raise concerns about the man. He said the company had let a stranger with no history and $2.4 billion of exposure walk in through a side door because of an incident in a lobby. And now here it was. He did not mention his nephew or the water or the coat, and nobody asked him to, because a surname in a lobby was still just Tuesday. Harold Pierce gave Claire 72 hours. Terminate the contractor and cooperate fully, and the board would treat Redline as a process failure. Refuse, and the board would treat it as a judgment failure hers, and there would be a vote on the chief executive before the end of the month. He said he took no pleasure in it, which was the sentence that always arrives just before the knife. Claire spent 40 of those 72 hours trying to break the case. She had the export logs pulled twice. She had 2 of her own people go through the badge records line by line. Everything held. The session was credentialed. The badge was his. The emails came out of the archive the way emails do, and every road she drove down came back to the same wall. It was possible. It was possible that a man who had been broke for 2 years, publicly humiliated, and passed over for a job in her lobby had taken the money. Not likely, just possible. And possible was all a board ever needed. She could not prove he had done it. She could not prove he had not. She had 5 months of memos, a $40 million turnaround, and the memory of a man declining a job over the phone with paint on his arms, and none of it was evidence. Twice she picked up her phone and got as far as her mother's name, and twice she put it down because her mother had told her the subject was hers now, and because a woman who cannot survive one board vote without calling home has already lost the chair. Andrew ended it himself, which she should have seen coming, and did not. He came up to 41 on the 3rd day and put a single sheet of paper on her desk, and it was not a defense. 2 paragraphs effective immediately. No severance, no admission, no request. Claire looked at it for a long time without touching it. "Don't," she said. "If you sign that, every person in this building will decide you did it. That's what a resignation means to them." "I know what it means," Andrew said. "It also means the board votes on Redline instead of on you." He was not being noble about it, and that was the worst part, because noble would have been easier to refuse. He was being practical the way he had been practical about a warehouse in the Midwest. "You can't prove I'm clean. I can't prove it either. So the only thing left to decide is what it costs, and right now, it costs you your job, and that's a stupid trade for the company." He looked at her steadily. "I've lost everything once already. I know the shape of it. You don't." He was gone by 4 o'clock. Dale Foster walked him out himself, unhurried and confident, straight across the white stone floor of the lobby, where all of it had started 5 months earlier. Bryce Feldman watched the whole thing from behind the reception counter with a smile he did not even try to hide, and he did not have to say anything, because the building was saying it for him. By 6, 4,000 people knew that the contractor from the lobby incident had walked out under escort. By the next morning, it was a fact. The newsletter ran a follow-up that mentioned the resignation and required no adjectives at all. The Redline deal froze. Marcus Feldman sent a note to the executive committee about strengthening data governance, and it was received as leadership. And Andrew Brooks stood at a bus stop 4 blocks from the tower in the rain at 36 years old, with nothing again, for exactly the same reason as the first time. Andrew spent his first 2 weeks after the escort doing what he had always done, which was work. He took a night shift unloading trucks and painted a unit on the weekends, and at 4 in the morning, when a man is awake and there is nothing to think about but the thing he cannot fix, he thought about the number, 11 million under. Warren Slade had bid $11 million under Harper Global's walkaway price, and everyone had called it a near miss, and it had bothered Andrew in the room without his knowing why. Now he had nothing but time, and it came apart in his hands on a loading dock at 4 in the morning. Slade's bid was not close to Harper's ceiling. It was $8 million above the ceiling, as it had stood before the 29th of January. A man bidding blind does not land $8 million over an old number and $11 million under a new one. A man bidding blind does not land anywhere. Slade had not guessed. Slade had been reading, and what he had been reading had stopped being true 3 weeks before it was ever stolen. That was the whole thing, and it was 6 sentences long. The file that left Harper Global in February was the pre-January version. The pre-January version existed in one place, the executive committee archive behind a permission Andrew had never held. But the log said the session ran on the 11th floor, where the data room had auto-versioned on the 29th of January and had not held that file for a single minute afterward. The session in the record could not have produced the document in Warren Slade's hands. It was not a lie about a man. It was a lie about arithmetic, and arithmetic does not care who anybody's uncle is. He wrote it on one page with no adjectives and no request, and he mailed it to the address at the top of a handwritten letter he had kept in a plastic folder since November, because it belonged to the only person in the world who had ever asked him for nothing. Evelyn Harper came home in April, read one page, and made 2 phone calls. The first was to a forensic examiner named Nora Whitfield, who had never taken a dollar from Harper Global and never would, and who would report to nobody inside it. The second was to the corporate secretary to confirm the date of the next board meeting. Whitfield started where Andrew had pointed, and it came apart faster than it should have because the people who built it had never expected anyone to look. The credentialed session was real. It was also true that Andrew's badge had been re-encoded 11 days before that Tuesday on a routine access ticket. Nobody had signed, and that the re-encoding had produced a second working credential that was never deactivated. A credential carrying an executive archive permission Andrew Brooks had never been granted and never knew existed. The badge office logs were kept by security, and security was Dale Foster. The access ticket had been opened from the reception workstation, and the reception workstation belonged to Bryce Feldman, who had written, "Do not rebook," in the visitor log in October, and who had been put in that lobby by his uncle as a favor nobody had ever bothered to hide. Whitfield put it in front of Dale Foster on a Thursday afternoon with 2 lawyers present and gave him an hour. It took 11 minutes. He had been paid $9,000, and he had told himself the entire time that all he had done was clone a badge, that he had not touched the data, that he was a man who pushed buttons, while other men made decisions. Bryce Feldman took longer, and what broke him was not the evidence. It was the video. Whitfield showed him 4 minutes of his own lobby, and Bryce watched himself lean across the marble and laugh at an old woman in a coat. And then he understood, for the first time, and much too late, exactly who had been standing in front of him and what he had just cost his family. The 2 emails had come out of a backup nobody could easily audit, and it turned out that Marcus Feldman was the executive who had signed the retention policy that made that backup unauditable and had renewed it every year since. In the second week of February, Warren Slade had wired $1.1 million to a consultancy with one client. Its registered officer had been Marcus Feldman's personal counsel for 30 years. The board of Harper Global met on the 22nd of April to approve the termination for cause of a contractor who had already resigned, which is the kind of thing boards do when they want a story to have an ending. Harold Pierce called it a formality. Marcus Feldman had prepared the packet himself, and it was clean, and it took 4 minutes to walk through. Then the door at the far end of the room opened, and Evelyn Harper came in wearing the coat. Nobody had told her she could come. Nobody in that room was going to tell her she could not, because her late husband's name was on the building, and the trust she controlled held 11% of the company, and there were people at that table who had spent 30 years pretending not to know it. Marcus Feldman knew it. He had bowed to her in the lobby in October, and he watched her cross the room now with the same stiffness, and it read the same way to anyone who knew how to look. "Before you vote," Evelyn said, "you're going to watch 4 minutes." She put a drive on the table and slid it to Harold Pierce, who loaded it because there was no version of refusing that ended well for him. The lobby came up on the screen with no sound, time-stamped the 15th of October, and the room watched it end the way it had ended, a man in a 5-year-old suit, saying thank you to an assistant and walking out into the rain. "That man is Andrew Brooks," Evelyn said. "That woman is me. I go to lobbies because a company only tells the truth to someone who cannot cost it anything, and your lobby was extremely truthful." He had 11 minutes to reach a 9 o'clock interview on the 11th floor. He spent them on a stranger. He paid $4 he did not have. Your receptionist wrote "Do not rebook" next to his name, and every one of you has spent the last month calling that man a thief. Harold Pierce said that a decent act in October did not prove innocence in February, and he was correct, and Evelyn told him so. "It doesn't," she said. "It proves what he does when nothing is watching, and there is nothing in it for him. That is the entire definition of character, and you have never once required it of anyone in this company, and it has already cost you more than Redline ever will." Then she told them about the second phone call, and Nora Whitfield came in with the rest. Marcus did not shout. Men like Marcus Feldman never shout, because shouting is what happens when a person has run out of arrangements, and Marcus had spent 30 years believing there was no room he could not arrange. He raised due process. He raised the irregularity of a shareholder commissioning an examiner. Harold Pierce, who had given Claire 72 hours and taken no pleasure in it, did not lift his eyes from the report the entire time Marcus spoke, and that was the moment the 40th floor ended. Claire Harper had not said a word for the whole meeting. She had watched 4 minutes of her own lobby and understood that she had been handed the entire story on the first morning and had chosen the wrong part of it to keep. She had ordered that footage within the hour. It had come to her exactly as she asked. She had watched a man defend her mother, and she had felt guilty, and she had tried to close the feeling with a job offer on a Friday afternoon, because closing things was what she was excellent at. Her mother had told her not to. Find out who he is first. Meet him yourself. She had heard it as sentiment and obligation to be discharged, one line on a list of 40. It had not been sentiment. It had been the only real instruction she had received in 12 years in the chair, and she had spent 5 months proving she could not follow it. Every person who had built the case against Andrew Brooks had been standing in that lobby on the 15th of October, or was protecting somebody who was. The receptionist, the guard, the uncle. It had been one thing from the beginning, one family, one favor, one morning, and Claire Harper had run 4,000 people from 41 floors up, and had never once looked down at her own front desk. The man who walked in with nothing had been the only person in the building who ever actually protected her family. The company moved in days, and the law took the rest of the year. Marcus Feldman was removed from the executive committee on the 22nd of April and terminated for cause on the 24th, and the matter went to the United States Attorney's Office in May, with 16,000 pages behind it. Warren Slade's $1.1 million turned out to be the least interesting thing he had done that year. The securities case was still open a year later, and he never got Redline, and he never got another board to take his calls. Dale Foster pleaded to a felony and cooperated. Bryce Feldman lost the silver badge, the job the family that had given him both, and every version of himself he had ever been able to sell across a counter. Harold Pierce did not resign, because chairmen never do. But he stopped writing things down when Claire Harper spoke, and everyone in the tower noticed inside a month. Whitfield's report went out in full to every employee of Harper Global on the 11th of May, unredacted over the objection of counsel. Andrew Brooks was cleared of all of it. Not quietly. Not by letter. Not by settlement publicly in a document with his name on it that 4,000 people read at their desks before 9 o'clock in the morning. Claire found him at a bus stop 4 blocks from the tower because that was where he had always been, and it had never once occurred to her to look there. She did not send a car. She walked the 4 blocks herself and stood beside him on the sidewalk while the traffic went by, and said the only thing she had left. "I couldn't prove you were clean," she said, "so I let you carry it. You told me it was a stupid trade for the company, and I let you make it anyway, because it was easier than not knowing." She looked down the street at her own building with an expression he had never seen on her. "You were right about the job in October. I wasn't hiring you. I was closing a file." Andrew did not make it easy for her, and she would have thought less of him if he had. "A stranger proved I was clean," he said. "You never did. Those aren't the same thing, and you shouldn't let anyone in that building tell you they are." Claire said that she knew. She said it was the reason she had walked instead of sending a car. She did it in the atrium 2 weeks later, in front of 2,000 people and every camera the company owned, and nobody wrote it for her. She named each person who had built the case against Andrew Brooks out loud in order. She said Harper Global had made a man pay for defending someone who could do nothing for him, and had then charged him for it a second time and called it governance. She said she had been given the truth on the first morning and had not been able to see it, and that the failure was hers, not the board's, and not the processes. Then she said the last part, looking directly at him in front of all of them. "I did not believe you enough, and I'm sorry." Andrew came back, and he did not come back to the 11th floor. It was Evelyn who put the thing in front of him. Not a favor this time, not a correction, but the hardest job in the building. Harper Global moved its freight through 11,000 vendors and 40,000 people on warehouse floors and loading docks in 9 states, and nobody had ever counted them or asked how they were treated. Evelyn wanted it counted. She wanted it built from nothing by someone who had spent 2 years on the wrong side of a counter. "You'll fight the whole company," she told him. "Half of them still think you took the money and got lucky." Andrew said half of them had thought that for a while already, and he had gotten used to the sound. She smiled at that, which was the first time anyone at Harper Global had seen Evelyn Harper smile in a conference room. He built it in 3 years, and he built it the way he had fixed the Midwest, by looking at the places nobody bothered to look. He never mentioned the lobby, and he never mentioned the $4. And when the people who had blacklisted his badge in November came to him for approvals in year 2, he approved the good ones and declined the bad ones, and never once told them which one they had been. Claire Harper kept a bottle of water on the shelf in her office unopened, and never explained it to a single visitor. She had spent 12 years believing the measure of a person was what they had built, what they controlled, what they could put on a table. Her mother had taught her the real one in 4 minutes of silent video, how a person treats someone who can do absolutely nothing for them on an ordinary morning when no one is watching and nothing is coming back. And Evelyn Harper, who still wore the coat and still went to lobbies and still asked for water, watched her daughter finally learn the only lesson she had ever cared about, that leadership without kindness is just arithmetic with people in it. Message: never judge a person by how they look or where life has left them. One act of kindness, however much it costs, can change someone else's life, and in the end, it will change your own.